Weapons from Paradise, the Epic of the Grail, Book 2. He meets the blessed Longinus, who comes from Christianized Gaul, with letters for Joseph of Arimathea in Glastonbury. He hears of Christ's resurrection and the miracles of the early church, but is not able to believe them. Book 2. The Life-Giving Spear. The forest, in its earliest flowering, is lost from the world. Paths too hung in gloom, walled in with hanging buds stretched tight to burst to lead beyond themselves. The birds, though silent, disturb the towering shadows with their wings. I wept with the burden of life, wept silently, afraid of something sleeping under the ground. Thunder, unearthly thunder, my footsteps alive with a sound like thunder nearing, calling my name. Spears of light across the forest floor. Where shade crouched deepest in the road bend, light exploded, and a warrior on horseback came at me full speed, his spear held high for the kill. Flowers unfolded behind him, as though in his hand the illuminator's brush, or the first power of daylight. He reined in hard, too alive for a dream. Huge forehoofs churned up the brilliant air, while a low column of sunlight struck him. The spear point flashed like blood from the rising of the sun. Thunder gave way to immense song in the trees, but I backed against a trunk. "Have mercy on me!" "Your speech is from a land I've known. How long," he said, "since you've left Judea?" "I don't know." "Don't you know what day this is?" I feared his eyes the most. They were in possession of awful victory, and the spear dropped blood. "Some conquest, I suppose, when you hunt down wanderers innocent of your history?" He leapt from his horse. I cringed. He raised the spear. "This is God's day, his sacrifice to the world." "How did you know about that?" I groaned. "This blood is his." "That? Look, it's fresh." "It is never exhausted since his cross which I guarded with this spear." "Cassius!" I hissed. "You know me?" "Was there ever a time when we weren't enemies?" "Oh, you've changed." He stared at me a long time. "You were the better soldier, a man who would fight for truth. I was only there for the job." "Carve a branch for me, I'll fight you now." "You threw your weapons down at the foot of the cross like you'd never think of taking them up again." "We'd waste no time in discussion if I could. With a fragment of my sword, I'd rip out your tongue." "I'm not the same man, not the kind of soldier to fight you. This weapon is not mine. You fear it. I fear it more. But see, it is in my hand." "I see the spear you've always dragged about. This is the first evidence of its use." "Everyone that has touched it has been healed. And some, just by the sight of it, have entered miraculous understandings like those who speak in Paradise. And they've given me the name Longinus of the Life-Giving Spear. I have come from the 7 bishops along the branching Rhone in Gaul, where Christ has prospered, bringing letters. Do you know this road? Does it lead to Avalon?" Seized by a fury of inspiration, I pointed while my voice trembled. "Who is that living there?" "A man already known there, a noble merchant, respected in every sea. But since the time he took the Lord's body in his hands and placed it in his own tomb, this Joseph is known to possess gifts of extraordinary holiness. Burning horizons tore through the high, thick branches, while my bewildered years stood up in my mind, tall as warring constellations, in one moment of truth. Joseph of Arimathea. I saw his face. He was the one among them who knew his Messiah. What is the news of him? Has the archdruid in Avalon received the mystical teachings? In his conversion waits the confidence and salvation of many kings. Joseph! How is Joseph here? In Britain? In the time of Saul's persecution, when the first deacon and martyr, transfigured in vision, saw Christ in glory, and Saul went blind with vengeance, in that dispersion from Jerusalem by which the apostles were scattered through the coasts, Philip with his 3 prophetic daughters and the 3 Marys with Martha and Joseph and others were forced in a broken ship. It bore no sail, no rudder, and no oars. Herod was certain they would perish at sea, but the divine breath brought it to the landing of the Rhone, and they followed that ancient stream to its hidden sources in the universal language of their teachings. The Druids opposed them at first, but when they saw men like gods, women whose simple presence inspired the earth with springs, the skies with signs, and hearts with miracles of the indwelling light, they changed their gowns, becoming priests of Christ. Then, choosing 12 among his disciples, Philip sent them with Joseph, his dearest friend, to Britain, to show this revelation to the wisest among their brotherhood in Avalon, since he knew the ways and their rulers, conversing and trading among them since his youth. It is said that Brand the Archdruid is unyielding. Is this true? I am a wanderer of the woods, caring nothing for roads and the minds of kings. I will give this spear into Joseph's hand to fight the Archdruid's pride, since this has measured the manhood of our Savior, revealing Godhead at the same time. This weapon of God, this treasure that is worth everything, this power within the enlightened soul is the mystery of humility, God's own most splendid blessing poured out from his own side. But no one should dare to think humility is easily achieved. The simplest of virtues, it is most difficult, since, in the beginning, pride was the ruin of angels, whose whispers unceasingly infect our thoughts. This is new. He teaches me the secret interpretation of the ancient scriptures. It is all fulfilled, and I carry its fullness in power, this wound in my heart, the irrefutable knowledge of my unworthiness, this terrible gasp of the Mother of God, so grace could be poured out with his blood by my own hand, since I am the one who thrust it, who opened his ribs. I wanted that spear, to turn it in my hand deep into his heart, but I could not move. My vows are declared to God. This one had no witness but his memory. I wanted to scream it. Instead, I only said, God could not be man in the first place. You yourself saw him and heard his words. Examine their power in you. To stoop so low as to take our nature? What man was meant to be when he conversed with God in the garden, when his intelligence was filled with the breath of his Creator's glory, you who saw him in Gethsemane must know. If he became man, he would be subject to death. And if he were, it would be voluntary, and death could not contain him. Give me your weapons through my body, then let me have a hit at you. You want to see God? Let's visit death together. We'll see him there. What's this? You haven't heard? You've had no interchange at all with men? I would have thought the whole world had known by now. Known what? Christ is risen. Christ? Has anyone ever known what that word is? Look, noon in the meadow. See that light. I'll rest my horse, since she's found the flowers there, while I describe to you what I've seen myself, every splendor revealed by all the prophets. The prophets? You? Where did you lose your mind? When Jesus cried out, and the earth was torn in horror, what my centurion saw I could only surmise from his face of terror. I was left in charge. I took up my command in front of the cross. That sign above him, not only my narrow eyes were strained to see, but my weak intelligence to know that writing in 3 languages. In Thrace, my homeland, some schooling was forced on soldiers wanting to serve as auxiliaries to the legions. With learning, one could advance to an officer's rank. But letters and understanding were never easy. I fought with concentration to read that sign. The clouds moved back. A momentary brightness spoke to my heart. This was the Son of God. Something, a spirit I had never known, lifted my hand and seized me through the spear. Perhaps I thought to make certain he was dead, but did I not feel in the thrust divine incentive? But I knew nothing then, except that his mother cried with a sharpness that made me feel the spear point twist in her own heart, and her whispers escaped in a terrible, exalted sorrow. Then, when I drew the tip out, see, my hand remembers shaking, his blood like a waterfall. In it was life, not death, and its vital gift to me was that a few drops filmed on my face, irrigating my eyes to the root with sight. My first clear view was the encroaching heavens. They sat in heavy darkness, but I could see every moving outline of deep cloud and through. How can I describe it? I saw things more by understanding than appearance. Second, in my newly created eyes was the body, blood-drained white, inexplicably lifeless, fixed forever in my memory which studies every wound, not least of which was this torn side I stared in, standing back a half-pace, my spear held high. Underneath, weeping and whispering scriptures, Joseph of Arimathea held out his hands where blood spilled into a chalice as his tears overran his gaze. And with new eyes I began vigil. Sleep was far from me. I watched the 7 mourners move the stone and fit it, and I heard their weakening footsteps dying away as though from the end of time, but my watch was only on that stone. From that hour I did not look away. Night grew, and with it that spirit settled like the original blessing. Some of my legion joined me with orders from Pilate, then slept, leaving the watch to me. Day returned, and my new sight was made immense. Night again, and the Holy Spirit upon me soared, touched the stars like a hammer on bells. From nowhere the morning star rose over the stone and kindled a fire on the hill behind the crosses, and the moment that Spirit was ready to unseal my lips with a shout and a song, the rock itself, yearning to speak, shattered in violence and threw me down. My soldiers woke, not certain if they were dreaming of the final terror. We saw two men with faces of lightning fall from where the sky in pure broad strokes began to grow like the visible stretched out hand of God. With effortless might, one struck the stone and broke the seal from the tomb and shoved it from the dark earth, except that when he sat on top of the stone and looked out with strong eyes that cut like a sword and severed my consciousness and I fainted, my last irreconcilable memory was an issue of light from the sepulchre. The cool dew on my hand I stirred. White lilies, earth's finest robes, in warm light had awakened near the cavern's entrance, and a wild rose already had climbed the stone where it had fallen. Fragrance embraced my soul, and I rose to one knee. There was a woman's cry of unsuppressed joy, and I saw her running downhill, out of the shadows, folds of sunlight falling from her robe. Wild grapevines hid my spear. Gently I cleared them and stood exultant. My men awoke in fear. Fear of the earthquake, fear of the empty tomb, fear of the Pharisees, and of my spear. Not able to console them, I left them, reported my watch to Pilate, who heard the story with fear. Then I turned into town to seek the Arimathean. Noon, a marvelous sun, and the city shone in streets like rivers of light. I walked with Joseph. "Your report is as strange," said Joseph slowly, "as all the wonders he promised on his last days. And it agrees with what the women described. They spoke with the angel, and then he fell silent." "Of course," I shouted, grabbing the brilliance of air in fists, "and he was there. Were the women believed?" He said nothing. "They were not, even by you, or you would have led me to their embrace and greeting. Instead, you were afraid when I came, afraid to see the centurion standing at your door. Now you are more afraid. It will be God that will stand there, and soon. But then, what impossible joy!" Our steps slowed. The narrowing street gave its echo. Our thoughts were gripped at the foundations of silence. Passing under an arch where the strong-armed sun had set its bricks on fire, I remembered how he stumbled, banging the ponderous cross arms, trying to fit them through, not able to see because of the blood, the pain of lifting his head, and tears, which were not for himself. And I had reached out to one high-tilted end of the crossbeam, laughing, and shoved it through. There, at the sun-fired bloodstain. Beyond the archway, a man stood under the sun, listening to the thoughts we had left behind in the street. I stared into the glare of his standing and tried to recall my own most recent thoughts. Then I saw the wounds. Not anything. Not the superior fragrance of deity in the veins of a man, ruptured with this spear to my own invigorating vigilance and increasing clarity of vision and knowledge in front of his tomb, prepared me for that moment. Recognition began in a swift apocalypse of self and rose like the flaming chariot while Alicia fell back on the speechless ground and cried out, except that this infinity, scarcely contained and standing there, was the pinnacle toward which the prophet climbed. He turned and walked, but his eyes made sure we followed. He began to speak on the first things of creation, the first day, and this first day of the week, and his resurrection. Each word I saw him more clearly. It had been difficult to look at his face in glory, but his words drew our eyes into it. Then, by some exalted turn of his mind, in the same breath teaching of the last things, foretold his ascent, and how by our own going beyond the oceans, baptizing, we would come to him across the emerald sea to his throne in the rainbow. How pure that voice, how powerful, and how difficult to describe, the clarity of enraptured ideas ringing through us while he spoke. He held up his hand to heaven, and his sleeve fell from over the spear wound. I stared. That instant, his eyes with tearing severity searched my soul and found his home there. I followed, blind to the world. Longinus was silent. His eyes were like the sun. His gaze was fixed on something in himself. His horse moved in the meadow. He turned his eyes unbearably on me and spoke again. What I have seen since my eyes were opened. God has given us a new creation, his breath reshaping men to the luminous image, whole populations made sacred with inspiration in waters so blessed, and the earth regenerated. What I have seen, that sign in 3 languages, successive illuminations, King of the Jews in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, like God's own speech in the 3 heavens and the echoes of his words, Logos interpreted. But not until Saul, the tormentor, was blinded, when Christ revealed himself in majesty to Paul, the new man. Scabs fell from his eyes, and he began to speak in the 3-tongued fire. Interior meaning of the Hebrew writings I have seen since Paul began to teach in power the fiery letters God revealed, since he himself has seen what Moses saw from the mountain, taken up in unspeakable heavens. Essence of Greek philosophy I have been given since I followed Paul to Athens and watched the conversion on the Areopagus, then sat at the feet of the mystic theologian. I never grew tired of sublime discourse from Dionysius, a man who lives in the body and yet caught up to the heights of utterance, things unlawful for men to speak, the teachings he had from Paul. Meekly, in clear and simple language, he instructed me in the most mysterious scriptures, in the names and unsearchable gifts of the unknown God. Tears of burning love beyond recognition his words produced in me, illumination more than I thought was possible for man. I was given another language, a 3rd understanding, when I followed him to Rome with his master Paul, a tongue of eloquence fluid in Latin, and with him I came into Gaul. And what I saw! Paul, who through his own persecutions scattered the first apostles and drove them to every shore, now he visits them with comfort, showing wounds of his own, suffered for the same cause, and strengthens the churches with his own disciples. Trophime in Arles, Crescens in Vienne, and installing in Paris Dionysius, archbishop over the rest. The skies over Paris are brighter, nearer, more transparent. Through his humble contemplations they have bowed down until God is seen in the heart of a theologian. See what I have been able to explain, since my own understanding was opened, since my dull mind was made irradiant with transfiguring truth. The one who is above all knowledge and essence in strange converse within himself as 3 angels appearing in speech with Abraham, entirety of Logos in mystery revealed as man, remaining hidden God, but showing even this in what was spoken in Galilee. And to demonstrate with power what can't be explained, the fullness of sanctification in creatures raised from dust. I have been made apologist of the faith, instructor to the blind, and am to be installed as bishop in the East. As soon as I deliver this spear and these letters announcing Paul's intentions to come to Britain and visit my former legion, now in London, encouraging them in the mysteries of faith and persecution, I leave for Cappadocia in Asia Minor for the city Caesarea. At times during this narrative, I trembled. Painful in my eyes, the cruel sun burned fierce as his eyes to my heart's bitter cinders. But now I mastered my thoughts and spoke to him calmly. Amazing. I've never heard a story like yours. I still remember how you screamed and ran away from the cross. What you could not bear to see is death itself. Man dead on the tree of knowledge, showing our condition. But he himself... A marvel to think it is possible for a man to be so led in belief, producing in him entrancements of delusionary bliss in this world of death. You are blinder than you were. This is a worse sickness than I have seen. His death tore the foundation of your mind. I wish I could believe. The way you see it is better. It gives a certain peace of mind. You, a soldier from the holy city with no understanding of your own soul's battle. I understand your condition very well. The promised coming was a thing you could understand less than any man alive, and you yourself are the one who dealt the final blow. You could not bear to see what it is you've done. To have pondered his death so long, and not to have known the resurrection, your heart has been infected with despondency. The disease has advanced to the worst condition it can, to a state of demonization. A brilliant prognosis. Madness greater than mine has overcome you. I hear the mocking echo of a dangerous laughter. I will seek my own salvation. God is dead. May his pitiful memory preserve me forever from anything similar to your condition. Listen to me. I, like you, am trained a warrior. Think how I struggled with blindness and impaired intelligence, and overcame them to stand among my legion as an officer. The training of the soul is similar, difficult, but achievable with effort. Yours is interior blindness. Exercise your hard-won fighting skills against yourself. The hand of God is strong, with weapons forged beyond the firmament for those who reach. To conquer yourself, you have to be poor in spirit. You have achieved this impossible victory? We are all in the greatest danger constantly, even having come to the quietude and blessed attainment of faith. The passions are so entrenched in our soil, we labor to clear their thorns with sweat. Since the first temptation that drove us from the bliss that blossomed in our nature in paradise, it is necessary to enter combat against them. Surrender is easy, but in letting them come habitually until our godlike souls become the home of their unholy impulses, craving becomes insatiate, unfulfilled. War is necessary. The sword of fire is in the hand of the lightning-browed archangel, guarding us in battle by the entrance to the holy place. Delirious, you rant of things unseen, thorns of passion, miraculous blossomings. How could you know the battle when you cannot see the light I have put on like armor or comprehend the guarding of the mind? But I have been instructed in how to take up the whole armor of God. We are not contending with flesh and blood, but with principalities, powers, rulers of this darkness, by which you are blind to the weapons one must grasp: the shield of faith, helmet of salvation, sword of truth, glory of the breastplate of righteousness. You do not even know what righteousness is, or how I could hunger and thirst for something like truth and sanctity. This one weapon you see, but are blind to what it is, or how it could heal you, or what a blessing it is just to have seen it. Despondency, contentiousness, and pride in you are worse than desires for pleasure and power. The blindness in your thoughts is that you believe these clever thoughts are your own. Absolutely, I do think that, yes. This is my personal creed. Destiny is mine. And though it's a hard one to have seen what I have seen, to know what I know, and then, above all else, to decide for myself what I will fight and how, and whether I can win anything at all, or what I might lose in addition to myself. The enemy has conquered. You are too weak to fight. I shall fight for you. In prayer, I'll wrestle with your demon. I won't give up. He called his horse and mounted. He whose spear I hold will give the victory. And he was gone. I retreated into the shadows of oaks, beyond the reach of roads or the possibility of paths. The random arrangement of mysterious blossoms and their unknown fragrances gave my bewildered mind an unknown freedom to sink into the impossible depths of silence where it might make some sense of things. Climbing the hill, rocks in my way, springs coming down, shadows greater than the sound of waters increasing in waterfalls, and the calling crows like the soul of shadows, like the entrance into death, and whatever it is that comes after. I turned and saw